All right, now we're going to conclude connective tissues. So up until now, what we have been discussing were considered to be connective tissues proper, and then we had 3 different examples of loose connective tissues and 3 different examples of dense connective tissues, which make up your broader category of those proper connective tissues. Now we're going to move on to some additional ones. Not saying they're improper, they don't fall into that those other categories. So the first one we're going to talk about, cartilage. I think most of us are familiar with cartilage. You find cartilages are almost like bone in a sense, but not quite as dense. They're a little bit squishier, they're more hydrated, you have more water in them, but they are very supportive. They provide protection and cushioning at a support and framework and so forth at various locations. Cartilages can actually be divided into 3 types, and we'll talk about the general categories of these. Hyaline cartilage, that's one that we tend to know as gristle. Whenever you've seen gristle on the ends of chicken bones, that's hyaline type cartilage. Elastic cartilage, guess what elastic cartilage is going to do? If I bend my ear over, boom, it goes back, rebounds back into place, and that's because there's a lot of elastic fibers in there, if we're using our good thinking skills there. And then fibrocartilage is a type of cartilage that has lots and lots and lots of filler protein fibers in it, hence the name. Sometimes names in anatomy and physiology are very, very logical. All right, hyaline cartilage. Where do you have hyaline type cartilage? This is going to be your most abundant type of collagen. And so if you think about gristle, you've seen gristle before on the ends of bones. If you could slice the gristle into little thin microscopic slices, put those on little glass slides, look at them under a microscope and color them with dyes, this is what you would see. So inside there, you were looking at it under a microscope, you would see these little compartments, these things that kind of look like the whites of an eyeball there. Those are little compartments. Each of those is a lacuna. A lacuna is a chamber. That's a little chamber. These are microscopic in size. And let me change my pen color here. Then you have cells inside those little chambers. You can really see that cell pretty well on the diagram. You can even see the nucleus on the inside. Those cells are called chondrocytes. Remember how we had the hypochondriac regions of the abdominopelvic cavity, and we said that those are underneath rib cartilages? Chond, C-H-O-N-D, tends to refer to cartilage in anatomy and physiology. So a chondrocyte is a cartilage cell. So those cells are scattered around inside the cartilage, and they're sitting inside their own little microscopic fluid-filled chambers, and each of those is called a lacuna. All right, so just like in your proper connective tissues, you have your fibroblasts. Those are the cells that make a lot of the major molecules that you would find in the filler substance in the tissue. Same thing here. The chondrocytes are going to manufacture these substances that you have out in here in your filler substance. So this is your ground substance surrounding those lacunae. Lacunae is the plural of lacuna. Your ground substance there, of course, it has water in it. It has, it does have some protein fibers in it. You do have some of those in there as well. And then you have lots of other glycoproteins, proteoglycans, things like that in there that give the cartilage its firm, but yet still kind of a little bit squishy consistency that it has. What does hyaline cartilage have to do for you? Supports and reinforces, provides some cushioning, but it's not too cushy. I mean, it you can compress it a little bit, but not a whole lot. All right, when we cover the skeletal system, we'll learn that when you're an embryo, your early skeleton is actually built from this type of cartilage. You have cartilage on the ends of long bones in the body, and again, we're going to cover more of that when we get to the next unit. Your rib cartilages are built from hyaline cartilage. Your nose cartilage, most of your nose is built from hyaline cartilage, except for up in here at the bridge. You got bone there, but most of this is hyaline cartilage. Trachea, the cartilages, the little rings around the trachea, built from hyaline cartilage, and then also the cartilages around your larynx. If you remember those from Unit 1, those are built from this type of cartilage as well. All right, then elastic cartilage is pretty straightforward. It's similar to hyaline cartilage. So you've got the extracellular matrix in there. You have your ground substance that has a pretty firm consistency, but you have a lot more elastic fibers, as the name would suggest. You have that in the, this part of your ear is called the pinna of the ear, that term right there. And so you guys know when you bend your ear over, it rebounds back into place, and that's because it is constructed, this is built from elastic cartilage. Other place you have elastic cartilage is your epiglottis. That's the flap that covers the opening to the larynx. When you're swallowing food and water, that flap covers that so that you don't have food and water going down into your trachea. All right, and finally, fibrocartilage is cartilage, similar to hyaline cartilage, but has to, not quite as firm, but you have this in locations, where you have this is between your between your vertebrae. If you've heard of spinal discs before, intervertebral discs, like they're showing you there on the diagram, that's where you have fibrocartilage. You also have some at your knee joints, which we'll talk about when we cover the skeletal system. And you've also got a little pad of this between your pelvic bones as well. These are shock absorbers, and you have these little pads between your vertebrae, and if you think like when you're bending over and your vertebral column gets stretched, these pads there help resist your vertebrae being pulled apart from each other, because they have a lot of collagen in them. Elastic cartilage has a lot of elastic fibers. Fibrocartilage has lots and lots of collagen fibers in it to help prevent stretching and pulling. All right, just briefly, other types of connective tissue. Third type is your bone or osseous tissue. That's another name for bone, osseous tissue. And that is characterized by a hard extracellular matrix. You actually do have cells in your bone, and they're surrounded by this very hard matrix. The extracellular matrix has a lot of calcium in it. As you guys know, you have calcium in your bones. And for now, we're not really going to get into the details of osseous tissue, because the next unit will be talking about that extensively. So just for now, just know what osseous tissue is. I do want you to know that it's a living tissue and that bone is a type of connective tissue. And then finally, blood. We're not going to go into a lot of details on blood, because when you get to Biology 202, you will cover blood in more detail. But it is a connective tissue because you have blood cells. You have red blood cells and you have white blood cells. And then your matrix is the liquid portion. So blood has a liquid extracellular matrix that is also called plasma. So that's your fluid in the blood that has all kinds of dissolved solutes in it, oxygen gas, glucose, amino acids, lots of proteins in there. And so that liquid portion is actually considered to be an extracellular matrix, and that's why blood is classified as a type of connective tissue. And that's pretty much all we're going to talk about blood for now, because you're going to have a whole lot about blood in your second semester of A&P. All right, so that actually, finally we're finished with connective tissues. And the last lecture for Chapter 4 will be about nervous and muscle tissues. And just kind of like we did with blood and bone tissues, we're just going to briefly hit some highlights on those because you will have entire units on the nervous system and the muscular system as we get toward the end of the course later this semester.